Blackthorn Prod's second game jam finished a couple days ago, the theme being mini planets. This is just going to be a brief video on how I created my game, the infamous Black Hole Worm. Now look, I knew I was going to be away for half the jam and I only had 4 days to complete whatever game I was going to make. I also had really wanted to try making a 3D game, as I only really made a 3D game in Unity once before, and that was Bricard, which I made in Illudum Dare, and it turned out great, so I wanted to try that again. So with all that in mind, as soon as I read what the theme was, I started brainstorming. I knew from the beginning that I wanted to have whole planets that you'd rotate around and interact with, and also really wanted to have some kind of fractured planet as well when they were destroyed. And these core mechanics are what I worked on for most of the first day. I'm not an artist, but I did want to try and make a starry skybox in the background, but I would eventually create a star particle system in the end, which in my opinion looked so much more visually appealing. I created something in Blender for the first time, so this was the fractured planet model, and basically I just wanted to have this show up when the planets were destroyed instead of planets just disappearing. I probably spent too much time mucking about with that planet fracture though. At one point it kind of made the centerpiece of my game, that and the ability to pick up characters and kind of move them around. I remember that I still didn't know the direction I wanted to go. Of course you remember, it was less than a week ago, Matt. And I also had errors to work through. So many errors. By day 2, I still wasn't completely sure what I wanted to make. I was continuing to play around with the planets and the little boxes, and I created this camera system. I looked online to get an idea of how to approach it, commands I could use, and I tweaked it around a bit until I got this. What I like about it is you can't go all the way over the top, so that way you don't lose your bearings. You can only go all the way left and right, but it reaches the limit at top and bottom. So I had that in place, but I still needed to figure out how to utilise it. The only idea I really worked towards was some kind of rescue game where you'd have to jump between the planets, moving the people around to save them from destruction. And you can kind of see those mechanics at work here. Then I added in these fire planets, thinking they'd be like the obstacle of the game. I even tried adding a player character which would move around the planets, and basically I tried to spice up my game, but in the end it just wasn't fun. So nearing the end of that day, the second day, I desperately tried to come up with a new idea. Perhaps it'd be underwater planets, perhaps you'd have an army of green planets facing off an army of fire planets. Perhaps you need to purposely destroy planets. Nothing was really coming to mind, until that night that is. As I was in the shower pondering my game, instead of trying to change my core mechanic, I started trying to just change where it was situated, like what the background was. That's when I had this sudden idea to base it around a black hole. Now the planets wouldn't be flying through space, they'd be slowly circling a black hole. Then I started coming up with a game mechanic from this, and in the end was inspired by an old game I used to play on yo-yo games called Deathworm. So now I had my idea in place. You'd be a giant worm, a giant space worm that needed to survive. You'd have to jump from planet to planet, eating to stay alive. Then I got to work on this idea. I started off making the black hole first. I used Unity's new VFX graph for the first time, which turned out quite well, except I did have to update everything to HD pipeline or something, and that caused all the textures to go weird, and I had to change a bunch of stuff and fix that up, but that wasn't too bad. And then I got to work on the planets moving and be able to spawn planets. And that took longer than it should have because of one small error with the spawning algorithm I was using. But anyway, I won't go into that. But after I got that done, and this is halfway through the third day, I got to work on my worm finally. So this was going to be the main character. Luckily I already had a solid camera system in place. I just had to modify it a bit to follow the worm, and so you could use it to interact and send commands to the worm and stuff. It's pretty straightforward. Unity also has a great bloom effect in its post-processing package, and so I installed that as well and incorporated it. Ended up getting more errors here though, including one that caused the whole build to have a black screen. But thankfully was able to fix this as well. I also added that star particle system, also using VFX Graph, which really just made the whole game sparkle, especially with the bloom effect on top. Then I was back in Blender creating a model for my worm. I had no idea how to add a material to it though, so I ended up having to make it look like it had eyes somehow. I applied the new models and started working on the worm physics. In hindsight, a finite state machine would have been better for the worm, but this was on the 4th day now and I was just kind of adding things as I thought of them. So the code kind of looks a bit rough and ready, but it works. To finish off that day, I worked on the opening screen, so all the instructions, and I also sorted out the camera worm movement, tweaks and values there, and applied the effects of the mini planets, so how they were going to affect the worm when the worm was in them. I made the worm able to eat the little creatures, boxes, and added a lose condition as well as a final time for when you actually lost the game. Oh, and I recorded some sounds. Every sound in the game, except for the music, is made from my mouth. You're welcome.
Okay, listen carefully. This is an info dump on the infamous black hole worm.